For 20 years, Michelle and I shared a life that many would envy. It wasn't just about the house we built together or the routines we established, it was the bond we forged through countless memories. In the early days, we were inseparable, partners in every adventure, traveling to new cities, hosting dinner parties for friends, and enjoying lazy Sunday mornings wrapped in each other's arms. Our love was the kind that filled the room with warmth, laughter, and an undeniable connection that seemed unbreakable. However, as the years rolled on, the vibrant colors of our relationship began to fade, leaving behind shades of gray that I couldn't quite understand. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, a missed phone call here, a late night out there. I brushed off my growing concerns, convincing myself that life was just getting busier. After all, we had work, family obligations, and the mundane chores that came with maintaining a household. Yet, deep down, I could sense something was amiss. I remember the first time it struck me. Michelle had come home late from her book club. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was curled up on the couch, a half-finished novel resting on my lap. When she finally walked through the door, her hair was tousled, and she had a flustered look on her face. "Sorry, Ben," she said with a half-hearted smile, "we lost track of time discussing the ending." It was a plausible excuse, one I wanted to believe, but I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at my gut. Weeks turned into months, and her late nights became a pattern. It wasn't just her physical absence that troubled me, it was the emotional distance that was growing between us. I tried to bridge the gap by initiating heartfelt conversations and reminiscing about our early days, but every attempt felt like throwing a stone into a vast ocean. My words disappeared without a trace, swallowed by an overwhelming silence. Michelle, once so attentive and engaged, seemed to retreat into a world of her own. The laughter that used to fill our home was replaced by a heavy stillness, punctuated only by the sound of her tapping away on her phone. Whenever I would peek over her shoulder, she would quickly swipe the screen and turn away, a defensive gesture that fueled my suspicions. I started to notice other things, the lingering scent of perfume that wasn't hers, the way she would suddenly smile at her phone, and the vague excuses about errands that seemed trivial at best. I questioned her about these details, trying to wrap my mind around the changes I was witnessing, but every conversation ended with her insisting that I was overreacting. "It's just life, Ben," she would say, her tone laced with irritation. "You're imagining things." Yet, it was hard not to imagine when I felt like a stranger in my own home. I sought solace in my work, pouring myself into projects and long hours, hoping to escape the reality I found increasingly unbearable. My colleagues would often comment on how dedicated I was, but the truth was that I was running away from the emptiness that was becoming my life with Michelle. The nights stretched long, filled with an echoing silence that settled between us like an unwelcome guest. We would lie side by side in bed, inches apart yet miles away. I could feel her warmth, but it felt distant, like the last rays of a sunset fading into the night. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, to feel connected once more, but the gulf between us felt insurmountable. As the months wore on, the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong took root in my mind. I began to question the very foundation of our life together. Was it merely the passage of time that was eroding our relationship, or was there something deeper, something darker lurking beneath the surface? The thought that she could betray the love we had built together was a bitter pill to swallow. It felt unthinkable, but denial, as comforting as it was, couldn't last forever. I found myself drifting between hope and despair, caught in a web of confusion that tightened with every passing day. The love we had once celebrated now felt like a haunting memory, a ghost of what could have been. As I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know that the truth would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman I had spent 2 decades with. The days turned into weeks, and the gnawing feeling of doubt only intensified. It was as if an unseen force was pressing against my chest, suffocating the love I once held for Michelle. I became hyper-aware of her movements, her actions, and the subtle shifts in her demeanor that previously would have gone unnoticed. Every late-night arrival home, every sudden phone call that she rushed to take in another room, it all began to weave a tapestry of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I decided to work late, thinking that perhaps some time away would clear my head. I returned home around 10, expecting to find Michelle nestled on the couch, lost in a book or preparing for our usual evening together. Instead, the house was silent. The only sounds were the faint ticking of the clock and the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for a moment, I wondered if I had somehow stepped into a ghostly version of our life. After checking the kitchen and living room, I grabbed my phone to text Michelle, but just as I was about to hit send, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. The door creaked open, and there she was. Her hair tousled, her cheeks flushed, and a nervous smile on her lips. "Hey, I didn't expect you home so soon," she said, her voice almost too cheerful. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was the third time that week she had come home late. "Did you have a good night?" I asked, my voice more probing than I intended. "Oh, just out with the girls. We went to that new bar downtown." I lost track of time, she said, avoiding my gaze. Something about her response felt rehearsed, as if she had anticipated my question and crafted the perfect answer. I wanted to believe her, I wanted to trust her, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and they were beginning to sprout. The following days were tortuous. I found myself obsessively replaying her actions in my mind, analyzing every word and gesture. It felt like I was on a roller coaster, climbing higher and higher with each passing moment, waiting for the inevitable plunge into despair. I started noticing little things that had previously escaped my attention: her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications, the way she would quickly silence it whenever I walked into the room, and the secretive glances she exchanged with the neighbor, Mark, who had always struck me as a bit too friendly. Mark was the kind of guy who seemed to relish being the center of attention. With his charming smile and easy laughter, he had ingratiated himself with Michelle, often stopping by for casual chats over the fence or lending a hand with various odd jobs. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, friends are what make life richer, right? But as Michelle's behavior shifted, so too did my perception of Mark. I began to view his seemingly innocent interactions with a more scrutinizing eye. One fateful evening, I decided enough was enough. I could no longer sit idly by, allowing my mind to spiral into the abyss of paranoia. I needed answers, a truth that would either confirm my worst fears or set my mind at ease. I took a deep breath and resolved to conduct my investigation. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to tread carefully. After all, the last thing I wanted was to provoke a confrontation without concrete evidence. For the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home, lurking in the shadows and keeping track of Michelle's comings and goings. I noted her late nights, the increased frequency of phone calls, and the peculiar way she seemed to light up whenever she received a text. I watched as she excused herself from dinner to take a quick call in another room, her voice low and hushed. Each time, I felt a twinge of betrayal. I decided to dig deeper. Using a combination of intuition and instinct, I began searching through her things while she was at work. It felt wrong, like I was crossing an invisible line, but my desperation to know the truth outweighed my guilt. I rifled through her drawers, meticulously sorting through clothes and trinkets until, in one of the back pockets of a jacket, I found something that would change everything. A folded piece of paper caught my eye. My heart raced as I pulled it out, unfolding it with trembling hands. It was a letter, written in a familiar, flowing script. The words were intimate and charged with emotion, speaking of love and longing. My heart sank as I recognized the signature, Michelle's. But the letter wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mark. As I read through the letter, a wave of nausea washed over me. She spoke of stolen moments and dreams of a life together, painting a vivid picture of a relationship that was blossoming behind my back. It felt like a punch to the gut, a reality I couldn't fathom. The words burned into my memory, and I felt an anger rise within me, a potent mixture of betrayal and disbelief. In a fit of rage and desperation, I dug further. I began searching through her phone when she left it unattended, scrolling through messages that confirmed my worst fears. Texts filled with flirtation and innuendo between her and Mark. Each notification felt like another dagger to my heart, piercing through the facade of our life together. The evidence was piling up, suffocating me in a shroud of betrayal. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon a photo that the gravity of the situation truly sank in. There, in a hidden album, was an image of Michelle and Mark together, his arms wrapped around her waist. Their laughter frozen in time. The happiness radiating from that picture felt like a cruel joke, mocking the years we had spent building a life together. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, the weight of the evidence crushing me. I was no longer in denial. The truth was out in the open, stark and unforgiving. Michelle had betrayed everything we had worked for, shattering the illusion of our life together. The once warm and inviting home felt cold and suffocating. I stood there, grappling with the reality of what I had discovered. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose heart was entangled with someone else. My world was crumbling, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let her betrayal go unpunished. The fire of revenge began to spark within me, illuminating a path I never thought I would have to walk. The air in the house felt thick and charged, each breath I took heavy with the weight of the truth I was about to unleash. My heart raced as I paced back and forth in the living room. The once familiar space now a battleground for emotions that had been building for weeks. I could hardly believe that the woman I had spent 2 decades with had been unfaithful, yet the evidence was undeniable, a relentless echo in my mind. As I waited for Michelle to return home, I envisioned the confrontation in vivid detail. Would she deny everything? Would she break down in tears, begging for forgiveness? My stomach churned at the thought, and with each tick of the clock, my resolve solidified. I needed to confront her. I deserved answers, and this was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating all at once. When the door finally swung open, Michelle stepped inside, her laughter spilling into the room like a warm embrace. She had no idea of the storm that was brewing within me. I could see the light in her eyes, the same light that had once drawn me to her, but now it felt like a flickering candle, threatening to go out. "Hey, you," she called, her voice cheerful. "I picked up dinner on the way home. I thought we could have a little date night." She held up a bag from our favorite restaurant, her smile beaming with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. "Date night?" I echoed, my tone colder than I intended. "After everything that's happened, you think we can just go back to normal?" The words tumbled out, thick with the bitterness I had been holding in. Michelle's expression shifted instantly. The smile fell from her face, replaced by a look of confusion and apprehension. "What do you mean?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage within me. "We need to talk. Now." My voice was firm, leaving no room for her usual evasions. The laughter and joy in the room evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. I gestured for her to sit down, and she hesitated, sensing the gravity of the moment. She finally settled onto the couch, her eyes darting between my face and the ground, unsure of what was coming. "I know," I began, my voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. "I know about you and Mark." The admission hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating the space between us. Michelle's face blanched, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Ben, what are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "You can't be serious." I found the letters, Michelle. The texts. The photo. Each word felt like a hammer striking the truth into place, and I watched her expression shift from disbelief to defensive anger. "Those don't mean anything. You're taking this all out of context," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "You're just being paranoid." "Paranoid?" I echoed incredulously. "You think it's paranoia when I have proof? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back." The hurt in my chest surged, and I struggled to keep my composure. "You owe me an explanation." Tears welled in her eyes, but instead of remorse, I saw anger flicker to life. "You don't understand, Ben. You've been so wrapped up in your work, so distant. I felt alone in this marriage." Her voice shook, but she held her ground, defending herself as if her life depended on it. "Alone?" I nearly shouted, the betrayal stinging sharper than I expected. "I was here. I've always been here. You chose to step outside our marriage, Michelle. You could have come to me, talked to me about how you felt." Her defiance faltered for a moment, but then she straightened, a stubborn resolve hardening her features. "I tried, Ben, I did, but every time I brought up my feelings, you brushed me off. You didn't have time for me." She wiped away a tear, her voice rising in indignation. "Mark was there when you weren't. He listened to me. He made me feel seen. Is that how you justify it? Betraying your husband?" I felt the anger bubbling over, mixing with my heartbreak. "You could have ended this marriage if you felt that way. But instead, you chose to cheat." Michelle's expression shifted again, the anger morphing into something softer, more pleading. "I was lonely. You think I wanted to hurt you? You've changed so much over the years." "Ben," I miss the way we used to be. The connection we had. It felt like you were always moving further away, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Her voice softened, a mix of pain and regret threading through her words. By betraying me? I shot back, my heart racing. You had other options. You chose the easy way out. I can't even recognize you anymore. This isn't the woman I fell in love with. Maybe I'm not the same woman anymore. She shouted back, her frustration boiling over. Maybe I had to change to survive in this marriage, Ben. You've made me feel like I was never good enough. You have no idea how lonely it can feel to live with someone who doesn't see you. Her words struck me like a blow, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I neglected her? Had I been so absorbed in my work that I had failed to notice the cracks forming in our relationship? But that didn't justify her actions. Do you think that excusing your behavior with excuses makes it any better? I asked, my voice steadier now, but the hurt still lingered. You chose to lie to me, to betray the vows we made. You could have come to me, and we could have worked on this together. But instead, you decided to betray everything we built. Silence enveloped us, the weight of the truth pressing down heavily. Michelle looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her vulnerability laid bare. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the realization that she had crossed a line, but also the desperation to justify her actions. I'm so sorry, Ben, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to hurt you. I felt lost. Her apology was a small crack in the wall that had been built between us, but it felt insufficient, like a band-aid on a gaping wound. You have to understand, I said, my voice dropping to a softer tone. I loved you. I still love you, but this changes everything. I could see the tears pooling in her eyes again, and a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to reach out and tell her that we could figure it out. But the other part, the one that had been so deeply wounded, was screaming for me to stand my ground. We can't go back to what we had, I continued, my voice trembling slightly. Not after this. Not after what you've done. The truth hung heavy between us. The dreams we had once shared were now shattered by betrayal and heartache. As I sat there, watching the woman I had loved for so long break down before me, I knew that this conversation was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and painful, filled with questions and decisions that would ultimately define our lives. In that moment of confrontation, as raw emotions poured forth, I realized that I had two paths before me, the path of forgiveness and the path of revenge. Each was steeped in consequences, and neither would be easy to traverse. But whatever lay ahead, I knew I had to choose wisely. My heart, my soul, and my future depended on it. The moment the confrontation ended, a profound silence enveloped me, filling the spaces where love and trust once flourished. Michelle's tear-streaked face haunted me, but beneath the sorrow was a simmering anger, a fire ignited by betrayal that I had never felt before. I couldn't simply walk away from the pain she had caused. I needed to reclaim my sense of control, to take charge of my own life once again. I lay awake that night, thoughts racing through my mind like a storm. Every moment we had shared felt tainted now. A haunting reminder of the trust I had extended, only to have it crushed beneath the weight of her infidelity. I felt like a puppet who had just discovered the strings that controlled me were in someone else's hands. And for the first time in years, I resolved to cut those strings. It was in those dark hours that the idea began to take shape. I would sell our home, the place that had been a sanctuary, a fortress, a backdrop for our memories, and reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. The house held too many memories of what was, and I needed a clean break to rebuild my life, far from the shadows of our past. But more than that, I wanted to hit Michelle where it hurt most, the home she thought was her refuge. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions deeply and profoundly. The next morning, as the sun filtered through the blinds, I made my plan. I began by researching the real estate market, seeking out the right agent who could help facilitate a swift sale without drawing attention to my intentions. I kept my emotions bottled up, presenting a calm demeanor to Michelle, who still seemed wrapped in her cocoon of denial and sorrow. Hey, I was thinking of redecorating the living room, I suggested one evening, casually flipping through design magazines at the kitchen table. I wanted her to believe that I was invested in our life together, that things were somehow normal, even as the wheels of my plan began to turn. Really? She replied, her voice still tinged with sadness. I thought we were doing fine. Maybe I should pick up some paint samples this weekend? Sure, I replied, forcing a smile. Let's make it a fun project. As I spoke, my heart was racing. I was balancing the fine line between appearing engaged while secretly preparing to dismantle the very foundation of our lives together. I wanted to make her believe that everything was okay, almost to convince myself of it, too. In the days that followed, I met with a real estate agent who understood the urgency and discretion I required. We discussed the current market conditions and set a competitive price, and I was surprised at how quickly she managed to get interest in our home. I found myself swept up in the thrill of the process, pouring my energy into staging the house, making repairs, and ensuring that everything was perfect for potential buyers. As the showings began, I carefully curated each moment. I was meticulous in hiding any signs of turmoil, sweeping away the remnants of our troubled relationship, and presenting an image of a perfect family home. Each time a prospective buyer walked through the door, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. This place, once a bastion of our love, would soon belong to someone else, and in doing so, I would reclaim a piece of myself. Throughout this process, I maintained a facade of normalcy around Michelle. I was careful not to mention the showings, keeping her busy with her activities. It was surprisingly easy. She was still recovering from our confrontation, and I used her emotional state to my advantage, letting her believe I was simply preoccupied with work and personal matters. I felt a dark thrill at the thought of her cluelessness, knowing I was orchestrating a life-changing moment for both of us. Weeks passed, and the day came when an offer was finally accepted. I sat in my car outside the real estate office, heart racing with anticipation. It was done. I had signed away our home, the walls that had once echoed with laughter now destined to be silent, replaced by strangers who would carve their memories into the space. I couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. I was taking back control, reclaiming my life. I planned the details of the move carefully, securing a small apartment not far from our previous home but far enough that I wouldn't run into her unexpectedly. The new space would serve as a transitional phase, a fresh start where I could breathe, gather my thoughts, and plot my next move. As I packed my belongings, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, excitement, and a bitter sense of loss for the life I once had. But more than anything, I felt empowered. On the day of the move, Michelle had planned a week-long trip with her friends, leaving me with the perfect opportunity to execute my plan without any interference. I busied myself with the logistics of packing, ensuring that everything would be out of the house before she returned. I arranged for movers to come early in the morning, taking care to time everything perfectly so that by the time she stepped foot back into the house, it would be a hollow shell of our past. As the last box was loaded into the moving truck, I felt a sense of triumph swell within me. I was leaving the pain behind, ready to step into a new chapter, one where I could finally breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Finally, after the last box was secured and the movers had driven off, I took one last look at the house. It was strange to see it empty, the walls devoid of personality, of memories. But there was a liberation in that emptiness. It marked the end of an era, the closing of a painful chapter. As I drove away, my heart pounding with adrenaline, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was finally free. Michelle would return home to an empty house, a stark reminder of what she had lost and a consequence of her choices. The thought brought a smile to my lips, a twisted satisfaction coursing through me. I had turned the tables, taken back my power, and now, the path to revenge was set into motion. The sun shone brightly on the day Michelle was scheduled to return home, the warmth contrasting sharply with the cold emptiness of what had once been our sanctuary. I had settled into my new apartment, and as I gazed out the window, I couldn't help but wonder how she would react when she discovered that everything she had once known was gone. I could already envision the scene unfolding in my mind. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks as she stepped through the door, her confusion morphing into disbelief. It was a moment I had anticipated, a moment of reckoning that felt long overdue. But part of me still wrestled with the emotional remnants of what we had shared, knowing that the pain I inflicted would cut deep. When she finally returned home from her trip, I remained in my apartment, my heart racing with a mix of anxiety and excitement. Would she scream? Cry? Would she reach out to me, desperate for answers? I had no way of knowing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the precipice of something monumental. The hours passed slowly, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in the air. It was early evening when I finally received a text from her, the familiar chime ringing in my ears like an alarm. "Hey, I'm back. Just got home. Where are you?" I hesitated before responding, my fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to tell her the truth, to revel in her shock and confusion, but I decided to keep my cool. "Out running some errands. How was the trip?" The reply came quickly, almost frantic. "It was fine, I guess. I can't wait to see you. I thought we could have a quiet night in." I paused for a moment, savoring the irony of her message. "There's something I need to tell you." Her response was immediate, a flood of worry evident even through text. "What do you mean? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath and decided to drop the bomb. "I sold the house, Michelle. It's no longer ours." Silence hung in the air for what felt like an eternity before her next message came through. "What? What do you mean? Are you serious?" I could almost hear the disbelief in her voice. And it felt good, satisfying, even. "I mean exactly that. I sold the house while you were away. I'm sorry, but you need to understand that this is a consequence of your actions." I waited for a response, my heart racing as I anticipated her reaction. The next few messages came in quick succession, each one a mix of confusion, anger, and desperation. "Ben, this isn't funny. You can't just sell our home without telling me. I can't believe you would do this. You're just trying to punish me. Aren't you? Where are you right now? We need to talk." But I had no intention of meeting her. I had played my hand, and now it was time for her to confront the reality of her choices. I let the messages sit, watching as the dot indicating she was typing flickered on and off, her frantic thoughts trying to coalesce into something coherent. When her next message arrived, it struck me with an intensity I hadn't anticipated. "I thought we were working things out. You were supposed to be there for me." The bitterness in her words stung, but I felt an odd sense of satisfaction. "You made your choice, Michelle. This is the fallout." I watched as the minutes dragged on, waiting for her to respond, my heart pounding in anticipation of her reaction. Finally, the silence was broken by a string of frantic messages. "Where are you? Please, let's talk. I'm begging you. Do you even care about what this means for us?" I felt a pang of regret, but it quickly faded, replaced by the thrill of my resolve. I cared enough to do this. "I'm not going to be your doormat anymore." I left the conversation there, allowing her to stew in her own emotions, contemplating what she had lost and what the future would hold for both of us. The house, once filled with laughter and love, was now nothing more than a memory, a reminder of the shattered trust between us. The next few days passed in a blur. I received occasional texts from Michelle, each one increasingly frantic and desperate, filled with pleas for a chance to talk, to fix what had been broken. But I stood firm, refusing to engage. I had made my choice, and now I was ready to face the consequences of that choice head on. As I settled into my new apartment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had taken back my power, severed the ties that bound me to the pain of betrayal, and in doing so, I was ready to reclaim my life. Michelle's desperate attempts to reach out were no longer my concern. I was free, and the next chapter awaited me, filled with the potential for new beginnings, new connections, and ultimately, new paths forward. The house had been sold, but it was only the beginning of my journey, a journey toward healing, redemption, and the sweet taste of revenge. The days turned into a week, and the reality of Michelle's situation began to sink in. As I settled into my new apartment, I was acutely aware of the silence that now filled the space where our life once thrived. I could imagine her pacing through the empty rooms of our old home, confusion and desperation writ large across her face. Each time I thought of her, a strange mix of empathy and satisfaction swirled within me. When Michelle returned from her trip, she found nothing but echoes and shadows. The home that had once been a refuge was now an empty shell, devoid of warmth and memories. The movers had come in and taken everything: furniture, decor, our shared life, leaving behind only the bare walls that whispered of what had been. With nowhere to go, Michelle faced the harsh reality of her actions. I learned through mutual friends that she was now staying with a few acquaintances, her pride taking a significant hit. It was a blow that I knew she hadn't anticipated, and part of me reveled in the thought. After all, she had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. For the first time, I found myself in a position of power, and I felt a rush of exhilaration. I received texts from her, increasingly frantic in tone, begging for assistance, expressing her confusion, and sometimes laced with anger. "Ben, this isn't fair. You can't just leave me like this. She pleaded. Please, let's talk about it. I need you. I can't even pay rent. I have nowhere to stay. But I ignored each message, letting them sit in the digital ether, unread and unanswered. The silence felt liberating, a declaration of my new resolve. I had no obligation to provide her with shelter or support. I had been the one betrayed, and while my heart still held fragments of affection for the woman I had loved, the scales had tipped irrevocably. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post from one of her friends, a picture of Michelle looking lost and defeated, the caption reading, "Just trying to find my way." It struck a chord deep within me, igniting a mixture of pity and vindication. She had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. I couldn't deny that part of me felt a flicker of guilt, but it quickly faded, overshadowed by a sense of satisfaction. Each time I saw her name flash across my phone, I felt a thrill of power. I was no longer the one being controlled. Instead, I was the master of my destiny, free from the chains of betrayal. While she wandered through the streets of our shared past, I was forging ahead, unburdened by the weight of our life together. As the weeks rolled on, Michelle's pleas for help became more desperate. Friends who had initially offered their homes soon grew weary of her presence, and I could see the cracks forming in her facade. There were reports of her staying in a motel, barely scraping by, the once confident woman now reduced to a shell of her former self. With each passing day, I felt a sense of release. The pity I felt was fleeting, giving way to a growing resolve. I had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged stronger. Now, it was time to take my revenge further, to expose her for who she truly was and to ensure that everyone understood the reality behind her infidelities. The idea struck me one night as I sat alone in my new apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window. What if I didn't just let her suffer in silence? What if I took it to the next level and revealed the truth publicly? It was an exhilarating thought, one that sent shivers down my spine. I envisioned a press conference, a carefully orchestrated event where I would lay bare all the evidence of Michelle's deceit for the world to see. It would be a spectacle, a moment where the truth would shine like a spotlight on the shadows of her infidelity. I could imagine her face as she heard the news, the shock, the humiliation, the sweet taste of revenge that would wash over me. I began planning meticulously. I gathered all the evidence I had collected. The love letters, the explicit texts, the photographs that had haunted me for weeks. Each piece was a testament to her betrayal, and I felt a thrill of power as I prepared to share it with the world. I wanted to ensure that this wasn't just a personal vendetta but a cautionary tale for others. I reached out to a few media contacts, setting the stage for a press conference that would capture the public's attention. My heart raced with excitement as I drafted the announcement, highlighting the details of the event and inviting local journalists to attend. I painted it as a story of betrayal and heartache, one that I believed would resonate with many. On the day of the press conference, I arrived early at the venue, a small auditorium that was buzzing with reporters and cameras. The atmosphere crackled with energy, and I could see the anticipation in the eyes of those gathered. This was my moment, a chance to reclaim my narrative and unveil the truth in all its ugly glory. As I stepped up to the podium, the weight of the world seemed to rest on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of adrenaline course through me. The audience grew quiet, the murmurs fading as I prepared to speak. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm here today to share a story, my story. A story of betrayal, deception, and ultimately, the quest for the truth." I paused, letting my words sink in. The room was captivated, eyes glued to me as I pulled out the evidence one by one, detailing my journey from love to betrayal. I described the moments when I first sensed something was wrong, the strange phone calls, the late nights, and the feelings of isolation that had begun to consume me. Then came the reveal. I held up the love letters, the photographs, and the messages. "This is what she doesn't want you to see. This is the truth behind the facade of our marriage." Each revelation struck like a hammer, and I watched as the audience reacted, gasps and murmurs rippling through the crowd. I recounted the details of my confrontation with Michelle, and how she had tried to justify her actions, blaming me for her choices. "But let me be clear," I continued, my voice rising in intensity. "No one deserves to be betrayed like this. No one deserves to have their heart shattered and their trust abused." As I shared my story, I could feel the tide turning. People were engaged and invested in the narrative, and I reveled in the catharsis of unveiling the truth. I had gone from being a victim to a storyteller, reclaiming my power one word at a time. In the back of the room, I spotted a familiar face, Michelle's friend, who had posted that photo of her looking lost. I could see the shock etched on her face as she absorbed the information. I knew that word would spread quickly, and soon everyone would know the truth about Michelle and her betrayal. As the press conference wrapped up, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I had taken the narrative into my own hands, exposed the lies, and let the world see Michelle for who she truly was. The revenge I had sought was not just about punishment, it was about reclaiming my identity and asserting my place in the world. Walking away from that podium, I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. I had faced the truth, shared my pain, and transformed it into a powerful narrative that would resonate with others. And as I stepped out into the world, ready to embrace my new beginning, I knew that the chapters of my life were far from over. The story of betrayal was only one part of my journey, but I was determined to write the next chapters with strength, resilience, and a newfound sense of freedom. In the days following the press conference, the fallout from my revelations hit like a tidal wave. Social media exploded with commentary about Michelle, transforming her from the woman I had once loved into a cautionary tale for others. Memes and jokes flooded the internet, mocking her infidelity and questioning her judgment. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers began to share their thoughts on the situation. And the sentiment was overwhelmingly negative. It was as if a switch had flipped. People who had once supported her now turned their backs. Her phone rang incessantly, but the calls were no longer filled with warmth or concern. Rather, they were filled with accusations and ridicule. I watched from a distance, my heart racing with a strange blend of satisfaction and guilt. Part of me reveled in the way she was being torn apart publicly. The humiliation she faced was, in a twisted way, deserved. I had exposed her lies, and the world was now holding her accountable. But as the laughter and derision continued to build, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just justice. The same people who once revered her were now tearing her down, and I felt a growing sense of unease about the situation. Did she deserve this level of scorn? Hadn't I wanted to reclaim my life, rather than destroy hers? Slowly, the sympathy for Michelle began to wane. Public opinion shifted, and the narrative took a darker turn. Some started to express their pity for her, seeing her as a victim of circumstance, a woman whose mistakes were being publicly punished in a way that felt overly harsh. The support she had lost became evident, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. As the weeks passed, I tried to grapple with the consequences of my actions. While I had initially felt a sense of triumph from my revenge, it became increasingly clear that I had also lost something valuable in the process. My satisfaction was tinged with an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. I had successfully dismantled the life Michelle had built, but in doing so, I had also tarnished my character. One evening, while sitting alone in my apartment, I received a message from Michelle's friend, a mutual acquaintance who expressed her disappointment in me. "You've made your point, but at what cost?" she asked, her words haunting me. I realized then that I had become a part of the cycle of hurt, and the satisfaction I once craved had slipped through my fingers, leaving behind only a hollow victory. I watched as Michelle packed her things, preparing to leave town. The thought of her departure stirred conflicting emotions within me. While part of me felt she deserved this, another part recognized the tragedy of a life turned upside down. With her gone, Michelle sought a fresh start, hoping to rebuild her life away from the memories of betrayal and public scrutiny. I heard whispers that she was heading to a new city, searching for solace and perhaps a chance at redemption. As she disappeared from my life, I reflected on the lessons learned through this turbulent journey. My actions had consequences, and while I had sought vengeance, I also found myself facing a bleak reality. Revenge had not brought me peace. Instead, it left me pondering the man I had become, a man capable of destruction, yet still yearning for something deeper and more meaningful. In the end, I understood that while I had fought for my dignity, I had inadvertently fractured my sense of self. As I stood at the crossroads of my life, I vowed to embark on a different path, one focused on healing, growth, and ultimately, forgiveness. It was time to reclaim my life, not through vengeance, but through resilience and the pursuit of a better future.